Hello everyone. It is Tuesday. It is 7 p.m. I think my wife just showed up. She'll probably want me to stop this, but I'm going to get started anyway. Let's do a reading from the book. We are at day 38, also chapter 38. And let's see. Zoom in for my tired old eyes. There we go. She brought pizza. I may have to get involved in some of that. Okay, up to now, what have we done? We've had a cleanup from the storm, and then somebody in the community lost their mind and started shooting people, and then our narrator got himself thrown off the island. Makes his way back, and there's obviously a need for leadership so that we can make decisions properly. And now we are trying to do something with our solar. Day 38, solar salvage. It's the end of a long day. We had a good experience. This was our first day of salvage work on the solar, and for these young people, it was their first experience doing anything complicated with their hands. The work itself is not hard, but there is a lot of up and down ladders. The panels themselves are overlarge and a bit heavy, requiring caution and teamwork when handling them. The panels themselves are sturdy. There is a little risk of breaking anything. There were 26 panels in good repair, and 4 more that were bent due to damage from the recent storm. We'll find out later if the damaged ones still work for the desired purpose. The interior of the building is gutted, so the roof is sagging, and I became worried it might fall in while anyone was up there. Somehow it held. I brought a ladder, then luckily we found another in good shape in the parking lot of a business nearby. I carried the tools I knew would be needed, as there are some special bits that need careful handling. And, of course, you can barbecue yourself quick if you aren't careful around 60-volt, 300-amp-hour batteries. We got all the panels down and stacked, and the connecting wire coiled. The charge controller is complicated with a lot of external wiring, but I've seen the like before. I took some pictures to have as a model. We don't have installation or programming instructions for it, but I can figure it out. We disabled and disconnected the wall battery, taped over the DC connects just to be safe, and pulled all the wires we could reach. The battery is heavy, about 300 pounds, I should think. Tomorrow we bring the truck and haul everything back. That, too, will be some work, as the streets are still blocked by fallen limbs. I have an excellent electric chainsaw, and the truck has a large inverter to provide power. We should be able to clear a suitable path in a few hours. It's so quiet. The streets are utterly empty. Where is everyone? The village elected their elders today. The first order of business of the leadership was to name their village. That was smart and good for morale. As of today, we are Gardenburg. It's cute. I like it. Good thing they didn't leave it up to me. I would have called it Teslaville or something nerdy. I am totally focused on electricity these days. A favorite hobby of mine since way back. The landscape is littered with the bones of abandoned technology suitable for creating, conditioning, and storing electricity. We need electricity during this transition out of global industrial civilization. With work, we can have all of it we want. I heard about what happened to the rebel faction. They were given the choice of helping out and becoming part of the community, or having their home boarded up in the back and being left to fend for themselves. That's what I was told, anyway. I wasn't invited to attend. I also heard how one family had accepted the offer to stay and cooperate, and the other 2 had opted to go it alone. So long as the latter don't have any weapons, or at least don't haul them out, it shouldn't matter either way. They can still change their mind later. Day 39. Beyond salvaging. Grabbing the truck, we went back to retrieve the solar equipment. I brought Bear so he could ride in the back and get to know the scouts. He's a pushover for attention. They had fun. Everyone seemed in good spirits today. These young people are remarkable, a real inspiration. Clearing the road was easier than I initially thought. We used the chainsaw 3 times on some larger limbs and one downed tree. You know what? I have this. Let's do that. Being electric, it's perfectly quiet. Perfect for this kind of stealth work. The remainder of the limbs were small enough to drag out of the way or ignore where the truck could roll over them. At the salvage site, wrangling the battery was a breeze with everyone involved. We stacked the panels in the bed of the truck, tossed in the rolls of wire, and took back the found ladder, too. While working, we overheard coughing across the street in what was once a carpeting business. Speaking of coughing, I'm kind of getting a little tickle, too. After we had loaded everything, plus the dog, and were ready to go back, I went to check. There was an old couple camping out there. The man was lying on his back on some loose carpet padding in the middle of the floor. He was breathing hard, like he was having difficulty. His wife was trying to comfort him. She was coughing really hard too, deep and phlegmatic. They didn't see me watching, and I retreated silently. Thinking quickly, I realized I had to leave them, with the thought of returning later. It made my stomach churn. But what could I do? I had these teenagers, a dog, and a village to get back to safely. The bed of the truck was packed solid, not that it would have served as much of an ambulance for 2 old people. We got back to the compound without incident and unloaded the haul into a garage. To keep it out of the weather. The scouts worked on me to go back and retrieve those old people. After a discussion with the nurse, she and I agreed to make a run toward dark. We tossed a queen-size mattress into the bed of the truck and took off. The way being cleared, we got there in under half an hour. When we arrived, we found the man was alone and dead. He was lying partially under a bath towel, supposing his wife had done that, but she was not there. The nurse checked him and decided he had been dead since about the time I and the others departed. There would have been little she could do for him in the best of situations, lacking a ventilator and a full pharmacy. There was no sign of his wife. We looked around inside nearby buildings and up and down the intersecting streets. We were reluctant to call out too loud out of fear of attracting unwanted attention, not that we saw anyone else. The nurse offered that if the woman had the same thing that had killed her husband, then probably she wouldn't get very far before dying as well. She wondered aloud if there was an infectious outbreak making the rounds and asked me if I or the others had any contact with the pair. I said we had not. She was glad for that, and we got out of there before it got too dark, thus forcing me to drive with headlights, which would be bad. After a meal, I sat on the roof of my house and listened to the surroundings as the stars winked in and out from behind scattered clouds. It was quiet, mostly. Somewhere in the middle distance, I thought I heard coughing. As I'm writing this, I get the sense that another storm is coming, though of a different kind. Day 40. A single candle. We worked on getting the new solar kit integrated into what we already have. We needed to install the panels somewhere, and the inverter and charge controller, and then tie it all into the local mini-grid that's started to take place off my existing installation. I tackled the inverter first, as it's twitchy, and the final location is important for all this to work together. I spent the rest of the day studying how to tie the new power source into the existing electrical distribution I had earlier cobbled together from Romex wire and extension cords. Which is a stupid idea, I realized at once. We cannot use the traditional external grid. It is dead, parts of it are down, and it's likely never coming back. But we cannot do entirely without it either. After thinking about it all day, I've hatched a plan. I explained this to the few people who are keen to learn. The approach I've landed on uses my existing solar installation as the primary host to boot up the entire local system as a mini-grid. This is called grid forming and requires a heavy ballast of batteries. Doing a little bit of editing as I go. Then patch all additional capacity in as self-aligning grid tie secondaries. That's called grid following. Solar, by nature, wants to follow an existing or formed electrical grid, where conventional rotating mass inertial generation has been used to stand up the utility. Without the public utility, solar generally won't launch, having nothing to follow. My solar is different because I understood the limits imposed by grid following and supplied my own inertial mass in the form of a big battery array. Serves the exact same role as a generator, except without any moving parts. The AC power can boot itself up or form the grid using the batteries as a source. Likewise, it can boot up other solar installations that are forced to follow. We have a few grid-tied solar installations without batteries. That's the most common way people have installed their solar power. They tie it to the public utility and then buy or sell power as needed. Net metering solves the bookkeeping problem. As such, these types of solar installations will boot themselves up when attached to an existing grid. We have 6 of these installations already. They've been completely dark since the utility power failed, due to not being able to grid form, only grid follow. People found that really frustrating, and it took some explaining. Now, however, it will just work. With the form versus follow thing resolved, any grid tie home with solar will have power as long as the sun shines, and for a while longer due to the battery support from my end, an immediate and massive improvement for those people. Any extra daytime solar from those systems will then feed the battery array I have online, using the inbuilt transfer switch and charge controllers present in my existing system. My battery array will in turn feed the entire system at night or on cloudy days. If we remain frugal, the homes with solar will work transparent during the day, all the power they can generate being online again. We can bring the others online as fast as allowed. This is a true isolated microgrid layout, the idea being to reproduce on a hyperlocal scale the original utility that we all knew and loved. It's brilliant, and it will absolutely work. I'm very excited to pull this together. What a hack. The problem is we don't have local distribution. The extension cords are terrible, not the right way at all. Since we only properly control the space behind the houses, proper distribution lines need to be in the back instead of on the street in front. There are a few downed power poles in the area due to the storm. These will work for our needs. If we require more, we can fell them ourselves using chainsaws. Nobody will notice nor care. We can use saws to cut off the top 10 or 12 feet of a downed pole. That's the narrower part and weighs the least, and haul these back to the compound towed by the truck. We keep the cross ties and ceramic insulators, as they can be removed with tools. Plant these shorter power poles in the ground, remount the cross ties, and then all we require is a supply of the downed power lines to distribute our electricity out to all the homes in our community. I love this kind of thing. It is absolutely going to work. I'm not sure how to patch into the service drops for each house we need to energize. The utility service drops currently are all in the front, where the meters are. Can I just cut the drops off the existing poles and drag them into the back to connect to the new distribution lines inside the protected compound? That means climbing poles, which I do not like, nor do I have climbing spurs. What I do have is scrap metal, a heavy-duty arc welder, plenty of electricity, and tools for working metal. A day's work and someone can climb power poles with the spurs. I'll likely be the one climbing. Note to self: don't forget to pull and jumper the electric meters on any homes joining the microgrid in case the meters interfere. A lot of hard work today. I'm tired. Much to think about. Time for a nap. The quadcopter returned, and someone came and woke me up. It looked like the same model as before, as far as I could tell. It hovered a little lower this time, taking a good, long look. Being watched is unnerving as hell, but we need to stay focused. Whoever it is, I hope they are keeping notes, because what we are doing here is outstanding. Before I forget, there are more people joining us. I overheard that over the last few days, 6 new families, about 20 people, have come to live here. The good word has gotten out, friends and family in conversation, and the news is getting around that we are trying to boot up another way of life. After 40 some odd days of waiting for the world to correct itself, and that not happening, people are getting hip to the program. And the program seems to be cooperative village life. The new people are moving in with their friends and kin. I don't know how we'll feed them, but that can be worked out. More hands mean a bigger and more diverse garden, and more productivity in general. There will be some lean times at first, but we can make it work. People always have. Day 41. Sparks. The new solar kit we hauled back has been installed on one of the houses that didn't have solar. Everyone is excited at the prospects of getting reliable electricity, even if on a limited basis. We've been brought low in the last month. Getting some critical technology working for us is proving to be a great boost for morale. We installed our first power pole today, and it looks spectacular. We can do this. We can bring back the power. By my calculation, we have about 60 kilowatts of rooftop solar capacity. And with more salvage work, we could probably add that much more. With any luck, we can have more batteries and boost our storage too. I'm considering doing some exploration with that exact thing in mind. We need more grid-forming mass. The thought makes me... That's my wife. That was my wife telling me she's coming home, and she needed the Wi-Fi password for somebody. So, where were we? I'll just start here. With any luck, we can find more batteries and boost our storage too. I'm considering doing some exploration with that exact thing in mind. We need more grid-forming mass. The thought makes me sad, though. If only I had managed this sooner and had this plan in process weeks ago. If I had, then maybe we could have avoided the mental breakdowns with Paulson and the rest. Would have, should have, could have. It's all water under the bridge now. Here's hoping things get easier. They won't, but maybe things will be less bad. The gardens, at least, are looking amazing. Rows of leafy things I can't identify, small carrots poking up, rows of corn and okra emerging. There are peat plants growing knee-high up their trellises and producing edible pods. The weather, though sometimes overcast, has been warm, and the plants are loving it. Can't say how much food we'll get out of all this work, though the main thing anyway is getting people engaged. Having a purpose in life can provide an ongoing reason to not give up. There is a lot of land here, all told. If most of it can come under deliberate cultivation, then there's a chance we won't starve. I was going to do some maintenance on the old truck in the morning, more out of habit than anything else, when I made a discovery. I had reached to lift the hood, and my fingers came away covered in fine grit. The paint job on the truck is already about half rust, so I hadn't noticed the layer of coarse particles until I touched them. The first thought that shot through my head was, nuclear fallout. Even before day one, we had some idea there was a low-grade nuclear war being fought somewhere, possibly everywhere. Since we weren't nuked ourselves, it was natural enough to relax on that score. But when today I felt the grit under my fingers, it took a nanosecond to assume the worst. How far can fallout travel in the atmosphere? Not far, I should imagine. After my first assumption, I relaxed a bit, but I still wanted to check it. I found a 2-inch paintbrush in the garage and a piece of printer paper in the house and went around collecting grit from every horizontal surface I could sample, with the idea to test it for radiation with my El Cheapo Geiger counter. Long and short, there was no detectable radiation signature. Crisis averted for now. What might we have done about it anyway? Nothing, of course. This is now the world we live in. They tell us that most of the dangerous radioactive elements released in a nuclear explosion will have substantially decayed in the first 2 or 3 weeks. Either we've already sustained the worst of the damage, or we don't have much to worry about in the short term. The long term will always be another worry. That does not, however, exempt us from future problems unrelated to nuclear war. The remnants of the modern world should be thought of as a time bomb. Allow me to explain what that means. The story of nuclear power. During our daily struggle for food, water, shelter, and security, it's easy to forget that we are still embedded in the remains of the modern world. Significant parts of that world still exist. They just don't do us much good anymore. What good is a water treatment plant without employees, chemists, maintenance workers, and the like? It might not be entirely useless for now, but we're still getting some small amount of water from our failing infrastructure, but eventually it breaks down. It is a big mistake to assume that, as things break down, they become harmless detritus. Instead, the landscape becomes littered with the unstable remains of a vast machine that barely ever held itself together. The remains of refineries, power plants, chemical manufacturing facilities, and all the rest. And don't forget to mention the warehouses filled to the rafters with chemicals in both solid and liquid form, much of it either corrosive or explosive. While I can't name one right off the top of my head, I know there are thousands of common industrial reagents and solvents that must be stored at low or freezing temperatures. Without constant cooling, they can decay into unstable compounds or volatilize explosively. Storage tanks full of fuels or crude oil will corrode if not maintained, releasing their toxic and flammable contents into the environment. Ammonium nitrate, a common fertilizer derived from natural gas, is found commonly in warehouses and silos, often in huge quantities, and usually unprotected. It is also a common ingredient in homemade bombs, for anyone so inclined, and there have been spectacular fertilizer explosions all over the world where the material is not properly stored. The port explosion in Beirut some years ago being among the notable examples of what can happen when something labeled as fertilizer is not handled correctly. One thing we can be certain of, in the rundown of the modern-built world, nothing will be handled correctly. And nobody left alive will know what to do with any of this, nor will they have time or tools. Yet, for all the dangers inherent in abandoned chemical and fuel storage facilities, which we must number in the millions across the planet, these don't hold a candle to the specter of all the abandoned nuclear power plants. I think it must have been 20 years ago that I first recognized and began commenting on this unrealized threat from nuclear power. The response to me pointing this out was always the same, that nuclear power has an unparalleled safety record when taken as a whole. I don't know if this factoid is true, But even if it is, it certainly assumes a continuity of civilization and civilized behaviors. When I would mention this particular problem, I always got the same pushback. You have no idea what you are talking about. I knew then, and I know now, exactly what I am talking about. While you can scram a commercial reactor in a few minutes, or even seconds, it takes days or weeks to conduct a safe shutdown. When finally shut down and stable, a nuclear facility still needs a full crew to monitor ongoing operations and to respond to any emergencies that might flare up. Bringing it back online later is like a radioactive dance of seven veils, except that if you make a wrong step, you may violate something more dangerous than a woman's virtue. Clearly, the problem in properly assessing the long-term threat of nuclear power was ultimately a lack of lateral thinking. Nobody could contemplate, even as an exercise, what would happen if humanity walked away from all the world's nuclear facilities. I suppose that's because the very notion seemed preposterous. Fair enough. And yet, here we are, having just walked away from nearly everything. I suppose one could make a case that nuclear facilities would get special treatment in the case of a collapse of civilization, that a dedicated cadre of workers and managers would stay at the helm through thick and thin to wrangle all the nuclear plants into a cold and safe state of shutdown, no matter how long it takes. You could make that case, but it would not be the reality. Workers have families, and their families would be in danger, same as everyone else. They would still need food, water, medical care, and shelter. Would a man go to work at the power plant and leave his wife and children at home to survive as best they could while he was away? No. Such a worker would do the same as everyone else. Panic, abandon work and community, flee with their family into the countryside, and as a rule, either die there or create a new life. Indeed, nuclear facility workers would know better than anyone how quickly off the rails a collapse of modernity could go. As such, they would be the first to leave, not the last, and would try to get the furthest away before their former job site went critical. And even if they were to mount some kind of heroic effort and stay on until the bitter end, what does that buy us? We have a shut-down nuclear power plant decaying itself into the uncertain future, managed by a crew of men and women who either must leave anyway or risk starvation. Because the modern world is gone, remember, and these people have no better a story going forward than did anyone else. Shutdown isn't anywhere near enough. These facilities would need to be decommissioned and dismantled, and their radioactive fuel and components disposed of in a fashion such that they will never be a threat to anyone. This is the work of decades, and, again, requires the full support of the modern world, including ready access to heavy equipment, trained personnel, and, of course, copious fossil fuels. Even the fuel rods, liberated from the nuclear core, will need to be maintained safely and securely for decades. Uranium burns if left hot and exposed to the atmosphere. Keeping fuel rods cool until all the radioactive elements within have decayed is a perplexing long-term task. Short of reprocessing the fuel rods in dedicated facilities, again, with workers and engineers, specific technology, government oversight, and let's not forget constant access to fossil fuels, bathing the rods in recirculating water under constant observation is the only other solution anyone has been able to offer. That nobody could think through any of this is itself an interesting observation. Whether the misunderstanding can be explained by techno-triumphalism, denialist ideology, normalcy bias, or just a lack of imagination, is difficult to tell. I think, in general, people have never been able to wrap their head around the prospect, indeed the inevitability, of global industrial collapse. All empires collapse, eventually. All civilizations collapse. Nothing lasts forever. But building nuclear power plants, fuel processing facilities, and storage facilities for high-level nuclear wastes are all the work of ages. Taking on long-term projects with residual tasks that consume decades, if not centuries, is at least irresponsible. It might even be insane. Yet, here we are. I am not saying that nobody tried to securely shut down the nuclear plants. I'm sure they did. What I'm saying is that if they did try, and assuming they succeeded, then they will have made for themselves a forever task. They can never walk away from these power plants. They must show up every day to see that nothing breaks or fails, and that nobody trespasses into the facility, which in turn means they are also armed and trained in security matters. They must expose themselves to potential nuclear fires, radiation releases, and meltdowns for probably as long as they live. And as regards any sort of normal life, they can never die. They are not allowed to starve, cannot succumb to disease, cannot be beset by war and cannibal zombies. The power plant is their temple, where they toil away like monks. I cannot think how they feed themselves, or raise children, or replace themselves in this ageless work. This reminds me of a different, though related story, that of the atomic priesthood. Back when people still allowed themselves to worry about such things, back in the middle of the last century, there was some academic discussion about how to protect humans of the future from coming into contact with stored nuclear wastes and decommissioned facilities. It was a time when engineers and leadership accepted that these facilities and their material waste would be toxic and dangerous to human life for thousands, if not millions, of years. The challenge for them was not to deny this, but instead to try and grapple with it. How, indeed, do you warn countless generations in the future to stay clear of nuclear dumps? How do you teach them the rudiments of nuclear physics when there might not be universities, libraries, or indeed any notion of atomic theory? One group recommended creating a religion around the pertinent points of radiation exposure, and creating rituals warning people away from nuclear storage facilities. It would use the same methods as any other religion, except in this case to instill specific practices regarding radiation safety. There would need to be sacred scripture to pull forward the body of atomic lore. They would deploy the trappings of religious life, for example, monastic living, to recruit new adherents to continue the core religious practice. If properly promoted, the atomic priesthood could create restrictions on the use of, quote, sacred sites. The monks would teach the story of how such sites are taboo for all uses, maybe how some places are haunted by invisible demons that can kill you, or what have you. Anyone who chose not to follow the religious tenets and tried to live at the sites anyway would likely die horribly, thus reinforcing the message. As the predictive power of the atomic religion was reinforced, the teachings would spread. A fear of demons would motivate acceptance, and the atomic priesthood could promote proper practice, without a scientific method, for thousands of years and through many cultural and linguistic translations. By the time the sites were moderately safe, perhaps a few thousands of years, the priesthood will have served its purpose and would naturally fade away, another obscure religion lost to time. As an aside, this narrative about nuclear power overlaps with global heating, which will also continue for thousands of years. People will be driven out of the areas where nuclear power plants were built, because that's where the population centers once were, allowing nuclear sites to collapse into themselves and burn somewhat harmlessly. When the climate becomes less hostile, people might eventually return, just as they returned after the retreat of ice formations at the end of the last glacial maximum. If cooling the planet takes a few tens of thousands of years, then the radiation threat will have also somewhat abated. Anyway, that was the idea. It went nowhere, of course. America being at core a Christian nation, the idea of a state-created atomic gospel would have smacked of heresy to such fine and pious people. Apart from that, would it have even worked? That's harder to say, but again, that ship has sailed. The question hardly matters. The landscape is now littered with these unstable hulks, slowly grinding themselves into radioactive dust. Abandoned nuclear reactors will never go away, never settle down, never become safe, except over geologic time, until 100,000 years have passed. Yes?
Are you ready for dinner?
Let me finish this, and then we can do that.
What did you say?
Let me finish this, and we'll do that. Until 100,000 years have passed, they will be hot, both in radiation and due to global heating, until the climate situation changes enough to allow humans to return. Let's face it, that's not a terrible outcome. We can turn our backs on all the nuclear power plants, let them implode and burn, and then, assuming we don't become extinct by other means, move back once global heating has been somewhat reversed. With enough time, the worst of the unstable elements will have decayed, most of the hard radiation will be gone, and everything else will have become buried under layers of mountain erosion and sediment deposits. Problem solved, and no priesthood required. If that sounds a bit grim, then get over it. We lost control of this situation 3 centuries ago, when industrialization and mechanized progress won the world, becoming the spiritual foundation of modern times. We couldn't save ourselves from this, not even starting 6 generations ago. The high priests of progress would not allow it, not the smallest part of it. And yet, like all things, the worship of progress will become another in that long line of forgotten religions. Maybe it did us some good at the time. Maybe now it will get most of us killed. Either way, we have none to blame but ourselves. My parting advice is stay away from nuclear power plants forever. And I will end it there. That's actually a good stopping point. That was a long read, and we will do something else. There's a link in the description to buy me a coffee if you like this kind of stuff. That's much appreciated. I will be publishing this book in Amazon digital publishing soon, actually. I'm just about done with my final edit, read through, and then I'm done with it, and other things to do. So thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments, please leave them in the comment section on the video. And if you have any ideas or things you think I've overlooked, love to hear from you. Okay, so that's it for me. And time to eat some pizza. You have a great evening.